to report out for?
5 minutes.
Okay.
This is from the rubric.
Greg, I think maybe you want to just
Start off.
Yeah.
So the rubrics cube, the multi-layered, four-dimensional chess. That was a bit of a discussion here around that occurred. It's also about looking at the classifications. I think Zach called it out in terms of higher order. We talked about communication, talked about transferability of skills, and there was that kind of, does there need to be another layer? Is there something else here that's required? I brought up, and I wish I'd taken it back out now, but I brought up about the consideration about the consistency across the columns. So the one that I was looking at in particularly, quite generic, across the first column, the A's and B's, where the person isn't proficient, and then the middle column of proficiency was quite more detailed, and then lack of specificity again around D&E and mastering. But actually what that played to them was a great conversation led by Zach, and I actually took a picture of it and put it into the can you just go through a few slides just to show and talk to it? Keep going. There. So the rings, continuum, maturity, I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically what we were saying is that in the A to B category, this is where the narrative is you're more dependent on the instructor, and then you get more kind of independent as you're going across. And Zach spoke through these overlapping areas where, you know, and Mark fed into it as well, where you'd want to see a little bit of progress across A to B before you get into that area. But recognizing it's about who's creating the narrative, and this is where the student or the delegate's more dependent on the narrative being provided, where actually now they're starting to provide a bit more of their own narrative. So that multi-layered, continuing on the maturity, you can go back to the other areas then we've talked about at length. Don't know if you've got anything pre you want to
I would add to that. So looking at the A, B, C, D, and E, our group's discussion was, the goal is we need everybody at the end of C. In A and B, they're still learning. C is where, at a minimum, we need to get. So it's not, we would never leave them in A and B. Dialogued a little bit about the word struggle. Felt that it was okay, but how could we turn it on its head to say, we want to create a nurturing environment where you can struggle, where it's okay to have some, and this was one of Sam's terms, soft failures and hard failures. Hard failure, yeah, dude, you don't pass. The soft failure is, now let's go back, you've learned something, we're going to continue to grow you. There was a consideration that A, B, and C was linear for pump operator. However, D and E, were you a future officer, were you a future instructor, we might have some layering of D and E's across different tasks, so you're just thrown into the scene. And now you have to manage it. Where for A, B, and C, we might, I use the example of Call of Duty, like they set that scene at the beginning. You're arriving, you're dropping in. There may be a couple of moments of pre-recorded video that call drops, you turn out, get an apparatus, you arrive on scene, and then you enter as the student and start doing the task. But that pre-recorded content is provided to you to get you in that same context. So that was an interesting, the layering conversation and making sure that we got people to see, feeling okay with struggles, but soft versus hard failures.
This next one was an interesting one as well. It links to the conversation piece we were having yesterday around how do we cultivate instructors across this. And it was felt within the group that perhaps that's the D&E category a little bit more, the identification of your future instructors, the use of this for successional planning, identifying of potential. And if that was the case, I think we talked about D&E being a bit more stacked, so it shows that kind of elements, the more complex scenarios coming towards the D&E in order to show that demonstrable excellence and mastery as well.
And another conversation just within the rubric was it does need to be more detailed, it does need to be more distinct, but you also need to set the scenario. You'll need to provide, and then looking at the JPR standards, and this was one of Casey's point, like, if you go in and click through it, looked up NFPA link and looked at what was there, it did go into a lot more details, but do you need to provide for the developer an example of what those tools, equipment, and supplies that they're showing up with are like? So to the point of what the project could be, is that one where, you know, this is a sample hammer, this is a sample pump, right? Whatever that looks like, getting those as common elements.
Yeah, so we talked about the word struggles, and you know, I think we talked about we were pretty comfortable, but it was the fact that it suggested more instruction required, hence why it's an A and B. And if those are the voices that we're hearing from the instructor level, then why wouldn't we use it? Why would we try and compartmentalise it and put it into some of the kind of categories? If you want them to use it, you need to share their voice. And there was more conversation in and around hard and soft fails. And again, going back to Zach's rings, the degree of dependency linked to that as well across the A and B. And the fact that perhaps it is about nurturing for success within A and B. And I think it was Mark that mentioned about hitting the help button, and perhaps if the help button's been hit a number of times, then that actually affects the kind of categorization as well. I think that was everything for the rubrics, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that just the next bit was about how would you adapt it, and we just talked about giving it a go, going back to the conversations yesterday. Give it a go, layer it into task books, filter it in, socialise with staff as curriculum is renewed, and I was talking about having a bit of pilot, run something through it back home in the UK to give it credibility and kind of efficacy. So yeah.
And we also had more work because everybody wanted to stay connected. So knowing that we had somehow found our way into a room where we had researchers, we had developers, we had obviously instructors at various levels within organizations. There was just that overall thought.
And you've got some more nuggets there as well written down.
Oh,
Cool.
how could this rubric support shared reflection across instructors? I think that was just the test drive with the academies, talk with SMEs, stay connected, curriculum and task books. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I derailed us. But actually Casey derailed us.
Yeah.
He's like,
All right.
Preet, you are a conformity assessment expert. So I don't know, did you put the photo in there?
I didn't
No.
get that bit. No.
It was to try to understand that there is much in the same way that there was a maturity of how somebody learned, there was also a maturity in how you could assess conformity, and all were fine, but choose your hard, choose your journey, and see where you would get. If you go to, 4.1, the most applicable was the abilities components, and then really whether it was availability, reliability, scalability, and then also distinguishing the process, the products from the programs. That felt easy to connect to, very understandable, highly usable. The challenging to interpret was the state-by-state differences, really knowing that, one, are you even going to be allowed to implement a framework? We kicked off our getting to know each other, and I asked everybody, what's your favorite AI tool? And two folks in the room said, well, we're restricted from using AI tools in the workplace by governmental requirements. So like knowing that that is for existing AI tools and we're now talking about more, that really is going to have an issue. The missing elements, and this was looking at the framework that had the environment, so we had the product developers, we had the state academies. Who was missing was the state and how it dictates state training is being done, assuming that that was the governor, but there was also the hiring environment and training and promotion environment that the firefighters work in. What's the HR director going to allow? What's the finance director going to allow? What's the city manager going to allow? What are the union and collective bargaining rules? And in the event that somebody's able to use a fire officer 1 or fire officer 2, we shift it kind of beyond the firefighter, to count towards a degree, would maybe the higher education space also say, well, unless you do it in this way, we're not going to be okay with it?
I had to put salad in there because I couldn't think of anything else.
Part of the evaluation use was, and it had to do with different JPRs being removed from NFPA codes when a state says, yep, we're going to certify firefighter 1, but we're going to exclude these elements. So for a developer, if they built out a all holistic, like interdependent environment of where you could do a lot of scenarios rather than option 1, option 2, menu choice 1. So you couldn't give somebody a pre-made salad and then say, ooh, can you go ahead and take out the blue cheese? You'll need to allow them to build their salad within that learning environment for maximum effectiveness, because the remnants of taking the blue cheese out, it changes the flavor. If you don't love it, it's left there. So that's going to be a really big intricacy in building this software, is which states exclude. And then, however, though, that provided an opportunity. I don't know if you go to 525, 526. The fact that today certain states exclude certain JPRs because they don't have the resources to test in a virtual environment, they may actually be able to expand. And I think breaking the concrete was one of them, that like, now we can do it in a virtual environment. Do we actually need to exclude? Which in turn may resolve some of that complexity issue that exists with state-by-state adoption. And for the does this adequately monitor technology use, one of my recommendations really was utilize the existing standards that are out there, I meaning the ISO standards. Let's not try to figure out how to tell tech firms to do their job. Talked about that? Yep. So I think that was it for us. And then the final reflections on what action should be taken beyond the summit, the project, it was just a lot of really, is there an opportunity for greater conformity assessment writ large in state trainings, academies, or state training directors that would bring its own consistency to the industry, that regardless of whether it was this technology or something else, a change would be easier and it wouldn't be a whack-a-mole game of trying to go through the 50 states and the 7 provinces to collect. Okay, yeah, that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, come on, Evan.
Oh, Evan, you're up.
Oh, that's
All right, so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. There's a lot of what Red discussed, and so in the interest of time, so first of all, the green group was awesome. We had the driver rubric, and then we had the assessment of the abilities section of the framework. So we had some really good discussions. We had Scott, who has user experience background. We had Alan with AR, VR expertise. Like, we had a really good group. So first of all, in terms of the rubric sections that felt immediately very accessible, it was the preventable maintenance, the hazard awareness, and the situational judgment, thinking that those were actually somewhat similar, the situational judgment and hazard awareness. The dimensions that were more difficult for us to approach specifically were communications, just in terms of that's a little bit harder to assess. And so we would need a little bit more fidelity and definition in how those were addressed. How are you going to measure that? What are the metrics? All of those different things. And what is the one topic that we kind of struggled with, especially with the driver, is what is this tool going to be used for? There's lots of different things. Is it for learning how to drive? Is it learning how to communicate? And different tools might be better suited for different things. So trying to make sure we understood the scope of, so we weren't talking at cross purposes. Next slide. These are things that were not addressed in the rubric. One of the things that I want to point out is that Brad said we don't do anything alone. So that was really important, and that pulls into the synchronous and the multi-user element of this, because there's very few things that we would even want to learn that you aren't going to be reliant on somebody else. Even within the cab of a car, you're going to be asking, hey, is everything clear on the right? So there's communication within the cab, but then there's also communication with other elements. So we envisioned a scenario where you have multiple units responding to the same scene. What's the communication level that's in there? So that team dynamics and the team communication we thought was one element that maybe should be addressed in a little bit more detail. But overall, there was a high degree of acceptance of the rubric and what was in it. Next slide, please. Oh, chime in wherever I'm not. How might it support assessment of learning? We talked about how it needed to address both current problems and then what might exist in the future. And that's not just operations, but the tech. So you want the rubric to be able to address what exists now, but when we get to the days that we're on the holodeck and all sorts of things are a lot more, we have a lot more fidelity, you want to make sure that the rubric is going to be consistent across time. I'm just trying to hit some of the highlights.
Yeah, just future-proofing.
Yes, exactly. Also talked about using this from an annual proficiency standard. So as someone, again, going back, we've got the driver rubric. If you have someone who's constantly doing an assessment every year to make sure that, okay, every year they've hit everything that in this rubric, we know that they're good to be a driver for this coming year, and you can make sure to assess against those.
One part on that too, right? I mean, skills fade is something that I think has been discussed for many, many years, that you do it once and then you're checked off for life, right? But if we're not doing this, I think that's what immersive learning is the best for, is that continual, when you can, you're able to fit it in.
Another thing that's all right, go ahead, that came up here is we talked about an open source repository. So talk to the manufacturers, and as they develop something, make sure that they are developing and providing a three-dimensional tool that can be integrated into a system so that you are able to train on that specific thing using augmented or virtual reality. And let's put the costs back on them. They've got these things already. Let's make sure that they're providing them for our use. Does it indicate enough for instructors? Yes, it does. We can move on. So in terms of the Bloom's taxonomy,
Go
next
to
slide?
one more slide there. I don't know why that's not in there.
All right.
We'll make sure that you
Yes, we have a whole list for each one of them of all the different words from Bloom's taxonomy that we put for each of the things. All right, next slide. Let's go to 5. Just to get at something new. So we had the ilities.
Here we go.
Yes. So we talked about specific examples. We had a list and talked through different things where we wanted to assess against the things in table 3, and so how those might apply to a technology program or product. And so we talked about integration with LLM, the different interoperability and compatibility. We have more of this in notes that we can talk through. Can this be used to establish a multi-user simultaneous teaching platform? Yes, and we wanted to make sure that as we were talking about things and as things are developed, that is a high priority among these, as you can, so you can make sure that different groups are integrated together and are able to train together or train on their own, but making sure that capability is in. Characteristics that require standardization. We talked about these become de facto, a lot of these things become de facto standards over time. And did talk about how some of the ilities need clarification and definitions. Next slide. Okay, so this is really the bulk of our conversation is, are there additional abilities for programs as well as products? You can see a whole bunch of these. I'm not going to read through them. We couldn't find a way to make all of them into an ability, so we did just put safety, for example. But I'm sure with enough beer, we would be able to come up with an appropriate word to make that. But these are all things that we talked through about ways that we could add to the abilities. And then in terms of final reflections, it was what should be done, and let's just get off the pot, right? Like, let's do it, let's test it, let's it was suggested that maybe the state fire training directors take the rubrics and start to integrate them, assess against them what they currently have in terms of standardized teaching, but then assess what we know of in terms of existing state-of-the-art and things that are coming out to make sure that they currently exist. Apply against the current state of training. Yeah, so I'm not gonna go through all those. You have all the notes, we have all the slides, but green group, we had a good time. Yes. Yes.
So you can tell which one came from Casey.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, right.
the
The
headline.
headlock was the Casey comment.
So, any questions from the green group?
Thank you.
I know, I'm sorry, I should have.
blue?
So you guys aren't painted in blue like the Blue Man Group? No?
No.
But the drums are coming in.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we did have an advantage over all the other groups, in that we weren't able to come up with a lot of John Oates-isms, but we had John Oates. So we had
All right.
Sure. So, we had a lot of conversation, as you see here, we captured quite a few notes, but I would say system monitoring and troubleshooting, that was kind of one of the items that kind of percolated to the top. And one thing with the rubric is how do you gauge maintaining proficiency? So we looked at it as, you know, being on the ABC versus the DE, but then, and a lot of this kind of feeds into the next few slides, was, you know, A, B, and C is kind of where you were, but the goal was to get to D and E. So we felt the rubric created a nice framework and is in regards to getting you in that direction, you know, very similar to the diagram that the group showed there. You know, the group thought that it might be helpful to have a companion page just because of some of the subjectiveness that was in there. And then we also talked about the ability to, if we did some type of immersive learning, that if you went out and you were working with somebody, that the companion page would kind of help them understand some of the terms, you know, as you know, the struggle and whatnot that we found in there. Well, go back one. You know, one was just, you know, how do you rate cognitive ability that we discussed, and then, you know, just the interpretations based on personal experience and external factors in their lives. So, you know, every one of us in the room could be the person running the scenarios with an individual and rate the same individual, you know, several different ways.
A couple of things we had on that discussion as well is, at the end of the day, you may need to have more than one rubric. It's just depending on the needs, and then subjectivity. We were kind of pro and con on subjectivity. One is provide a document that kind of explains what the definitions mean, like you were saying. What does have struggle mean? But at the same time, maybe a little subjectivity built into it is not a bad thing, because as different parts of the country, different states, different organizations use this, then they can mold it to their particular circumstance.
And then on the flip side of that, we said, you know, if the language in the document is too tight and as the technology advances, you know, do we quickly outdate our documents and have to do document refreshes more often?
Yeah, one other thing, that's putting on my NFFF hat on again, one thing that I brought up, that I think I can speak for the group, is that maybe we want to incorporate different models into the rubric, like the life safety initiatives. Maybe there's a place for the life safety initiatives to support the rubric or vice versa.
You know, the group really felt it was a evaluation tool, or not an evaluation tool, but more of a lesson plan target. So they felt it was really good if you were going to create a program, training program specific to something, or if you were evaluating a training program, that they felt that was a really good guide for that. Again, D&E provided a framework, what to strive for, and you know, we didn't see the instructors using that as the document itself. But you know, to get a group of SMEs to have that document guide them into actually creating a training curriculum. So we thought that that it did kind of fit a little on the taxonomy, but the group really felt that that should focus more into the JPR world. What was that one?
Yeah, specifically with the JPRs, that the language is consistent between the taxonomy and what's found in the NFPA JPRs, just to reconcile.
Again, just going back, you know, evaluate or create a new training program, we felt. You know, just it create. You know, it was a good guide to help create a plan to raise proficiencies, A, B, and C to a D and E. Again, on the companion and subjectiveness.
Yeah, this is the conformity assessment.
Yep, the conformity assessment. So one of the things that we talked about was looking at this tool we felt that you could use it for more than what we were discussing. So we found many different applications that we thought you could, you know, take the same thought processes and apply to different things. A big discussion we had on was, you know, instructors comfortable with the platform, you know, in an immersive learning scenario that they're using some type of technology with, as well as, you know, having the skill set to provide that education to the students and to gain their comfort and adoption into that learning tool. And then we only had one other thing, was in table 2, column D, line 10, we thought we should remove generational, that kind of came up, so. We kind of skipped, we went back and we did all those last. We started with the blues, so. So going back to this, so C1 and C2, we felt there should be some collaboration outside of the fire service, colleges, universities, association, you know, industry for immersive learning experience. You know, then we had a discussion about different outside organizations that can, you know, such as grant providers and foundations. Let's see, again, it was the competency and comfort with the instructor and the student. You know, is the student ready to learn? Gauge the tool if it's adequate for the skills that we're actually trying to teach and measure. You know, the students had to be open-minded to the learning experience regardless of the delivery method and current level of certification and experience. For the assessment, we said, you know, just feedback and surveys from the students, instructors, you know, but having certification kind of in a feedback loop, as well as also, you know, we felt that community as well would provide feedback. It would be a good source of feedback. And that's it. All right.
Thank you. And group yellow.
So Group Yellow, we had an array of backgrounds. Most of them were in the position of that they would recommend to a state fire training director what could be purchased based on criteria, et cetera. And we had two opening comments, opening statements. Was this process to identify a mechanism or a rubric for product acquisition, to buy the simulator, to buy the AR system? Or was it something that was focused on the end user, the student who's going to be trained and evaluated using it? And because it took us in two different directions. We actually tried to focus on both at the same time and to see if the rubric worked or not. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. So to start with, the basic vehicle control, we identified that was most immediately applicable for purchasing situations. And primarily that center column that talked about competency, because the wording there was pretty generic enough. We also identified a lot of AHJ conditions were going to be specific to this, because the software in this system would need to be flexible enough in order to include AHJ situations based on the JPRs. And when they talk about AHJ, it needs to be have a place to plug that in. And that would have to be a conversation that would be with the manufacturer of the piece of equipment and the AHJ, and say, well, we needed to do this. We also needed to do this and this and this and this and this. And I think we identified it as a specification sheet, if you will, along with some mechanical items. But there was a level of flexibility that was needed in this process. The situational judgment one was also good. I talked about flexibility. This allows for a safe failure. We are the one that was driving the vehicle. Somebody brought it up that, hey, let's go take out the $1.8 million fire truck on a slippery, wintry day, and let's see if we can do a 6-wheel slide in the parking lot. No, we're not going to do that. But you can do it in the simulator in a safe way and see how you react to it. Okay, good idea. All right, so safe failures could occur. Maybe it's along the lines of the hard and soft failures that was discussed earlier. This is an example of a JPR that was identified there. So we thought it would be best to add the JPR language to the actual dimension so people know what the actual expectation is up front, as opposed to having to go hunt for it.
Well, and you know, the dimensions in some cases had as many as 8 different JPRs, and you say, how do you convert that bundle of 8 into one? And it's the whole idea of one verb per measure of success, and you've got to work through that. And we have other thoughts about how to do that, but you really need the JPR there.
Yeah, so having it there now, I know, understanding that the development team here put it together as an example, maybe there only should be one JPR there. But it's just a matter of, is it possible to do all these things with this device, this identification of this machine that the JPR is expected to do. If it can do more than that, great, but it needs to be more plainly laid out.
I guess I appreciate all of this discussion. I think I'm just a little confused, because if you have one JPR, then it's just going to be the list of JPRs over again. So that's the point of the rubric, is to map the JPRs in a way that we can start to think about this. So I guess that's just something I'm posing to the group. If it's one JPR per line, then it's just a list of JPRs over again. So just thinking along those lines.
But I think we were discussing from an assessment standpoint, you would need to assess each of those JPRs individually.
Right.
And so lumping them as 9 would be difficult to, it would be almost unwieldy, because you might be successful in some and unsuccessful in others, if that makes sense.
Right, but that's great, that's not this.
Yeah, they didn't, she doesn't want a correlation sheet.
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's, I think we're getting, yeah,
That's
we're
where we
removing,
got,
yeah.
that's where we said, are you evaluating a piece of equipment to do certain things, or are you using it as an evaluation tool for a person that's being evaluated against the JPR? That's where the difference between product acquisition and learner activity kind of took various groups in different directions. So when we saw a lot of the JPRs that were listed there, it's a matter of trying to evaluate, can this device, this piece of equipment, do all these things based on all these JPRs. That was the expectation of the JPRs. So we thought that if they were listed out, it was more of a plain language, right in your face depiction of what the equipment would need to be done. And the word struggles and the LY words, that's already been identified before, so we can go on from that. Can the benchmarks be measured? In other words, if it says that the particular piece of the maintains control of the vehicle, maintains control of the vehicle, what does that mean? Can the piece of equipment collect data points when you go over the center line and come back over the center? How many times do you do that? There's a timestamp to do that. If it can collect those data points, then you can utilize those as quantitative data points to use for evaluation or feedback to the individual that's being trained. Well, you went over the center line 10 times in the last 10 minutes. Are you struggling? Are you having difficulty? Is there a problem? Or what's going on? And to have the device and the software provide that feedback would be important, as opposed to it being more subjective in nature. Okay, like that. Okay, next. LY words again, being repetitive, being the last group, we get to be repetitive here. We talked about LI words again, maybe come up with more quantitative, hard type data that is available. Provide AHJ input. There was a statement that was made that there's some SOP, SOG, or guidelines that identify a statement, but there are blanks in certain places to put in the numeric or a quantitative type identifier, so that the content is similar, but is just certain parameters are put into place so that it would be used as a template versus someone having to write something from a blank piece of paper. Add JPI detail, okay. All right, this is where we shifted over to, if this is being used as a learning tool for a student, that provide this documentation for instructor-student feedback as a result of the device's ability to generate data. Okay, we skipped by a lot of these.
Now that's, you gotta go down.
Yeah,
Or
that's
yellow.
the other-
Yeah, there you
yeah,
go.
okay.
There you go.
So, actually, we'll go right to the next slide if you could. Which was the step. Our task was to look at what's the difference between a novice, an advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and an expert. And Ed put this together while he was watching others go through their presentations. And he came up with this staircase type situation where we look at the novice, ready and willing to learn. Learning, but still has major gaps. So they're working on it. They're beginning. It's someone who has the ability to learn, has a level of motivation, may still need a little more to get into the lockstep of what's happening, but they're not able to actually do something without getting into harm's way. Ready and willing to learn and filling in the gaps as they go along is the advanced beginner. They've shown a level of progression. They have gaps in their learning. They're making mistakes, but they're not getting hurt along the way. They're highly supervised as they do this. Passes all the professional qualification requirements, the JPRs that are expected of them. At some point, they could be certified or given a blessing that they are considered competent in this particular level. Proficient, very competent, not exactly a quantitative term, but they're practicing, they're further practicing and applying their trade or their learned discipline, that they are doing it over and over, and the more sets and reps that they do, either in the training environment still or in real life, they're getting more and more better at it. They're finding more efficient ways of getting the job done, maybe mentoring some others, being the senior person maybe within a group, and they're working through these things and developing some maybe shortcuts on their own, some ideas. And then we have the expert or the master, who is well beyond the pro board standards. They are the teacher, mentor to others. This is the person who is willing and able to teach the next one. And from a master standpoint, I consider the people in this room the masters of their trade, masters of their craft, because a master is somebody who's planting the seeds that will come up 10 years and 20 years from now and will not enjoy the shade of that tree, but others will. And those are the people that are actually out there looking at what's the next generation looking at? What's the next generation going to enjoy? What can they enjoy from the fruits of the labors that happen today?
So can I?
Yes. Ed's going to follow up with that.
Well, there were two, I think, further, and I'll use driving the apparatus. Which is, at the novice level, the immersive learning situation that you're going to use is different than the immersive learning you're going to use for advanced beginner. In the novice, you may be using a vehicle that is the size of a pickup truck. And in the advanced beginner, you may be using a vehicle that's the size of a fire truck. The complexity, the difficulty goes up as you go up these steps. At the expert level, the training, the teacher role may be informal teacher, informal mentor, because there's competency that they need to have to be an instructor teacher, but the informal teacher, as the expert master, is recognized. They're helping the novices as they're going forward. Okay, so each of the competencies that is in this bundle, each of the tools, the immersive tools, would change as you go up these steps. And the reason, and then we had a very good discussion, we don't need 5 steps, but the students need 5 steps, because by having 5 steps, they can make progress and feel like they've accomplished it and are energized to keep going. If you start at novice, day 1, and all you can see is what it's like when you're certified, you may give up, because the steps are too big. And creating 5 steps allows them to have bites that are more manageable, and when you finish novice, yay, I've accomplished something. I have some, graduation of success. And we felt like that was the reason why having 5 instead of 3 was much more applicable to the student than it was to the instructors. And of course, it's very important then to the immersive learning, so. I think that's pretty much what.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for your participation in the breakout groups and the information you brought forward to the facilitators and the scribe. Thank you for your efforts to maintain the herd and to kind of get those golden nuggets to the scribes for recording it and making it available to Srini and the rest of the team in an organized fashion so we can put it into the deliverable and bring your voice forward. So thank you for all of that. I'd like to offer the members of the project team just an opportunity for a few quick closing comments before we say our final farewells. I'll start with Casey.
So I just want to also say thank you for all your input. This is very valuable as we try to pull this together. I am one of those people that live in visions, and I keep thinking, where do we want to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Or as my kids and even grandkids now say, what do you want to be when you grow up, Granddad? Or whatever. But, you know, that I think is very much where we are. I do want to express, importantly, that we have a voice here. And I don't mean just you individually. We got to put together a report. But this is our chance to really kind of etch it in the stone. Not that I keep thinking about putting other groups in a headlock and flipping them on the ground and stepping on them or whatever, but as much as I just, you know, it drives me crazy when I see other worlds, whether it's the gaming world or the, you know, people fixing my furnace and they're using augmented reality and they're doing this stuff, and it's like, and yet we can't. You know, one fire department over here can't do a driving drill with another fire department over there. That's crazy. And, you know, so I'm anxious to see us change that and really move forward and do the things we want to do effectively and efficiently. And this is just another tool in our, you know, arsenal of things to do that with. So I want to say thank you. I do also want to say, Ken, before everybody departs, and I know it's going quickly, we got to just make sure there's any logistics about, you know, rides and also about travel expenses and all that. But, you know, but thank you for, you know, all this important input. And you know where we live, so always feed us with comments. Still.
So I was just sharing this with a few folks who actually attended the File Summit a couple of years ago. I think we could all acknowledge that I think the conversation is different today, I think 2 years. So which is kind of a bigger reflection for us as a project team as well, because that is kind of what was the takeaway 2 years ago. How do we continue the momentum in terms of having a much more continued conversation, but with probably something that is a tangible tool that we could take further. Again, we are probably, one of the reflection, I think, the way we started yesterday was like, we were, I think, looking at these tools, probably starting off differently, but I think there is a kind of an acknowledgement probably towards end of this day and a half, probably seeing it, more where we see the application of this is. So that's kind of the objective with this project as well. And I also heard that where do we want to go next? I think there was a section 6 where, what is beyond this summit or project. I think there is a role, obviously, through NAFTD actually, where how we want to use this further to socialize the information and really implement this further. And from the Research Foundation standpoint, we are seeing it as a like an able partner here from the research side of things to facilitate this conversation going. So hopefully we are able to continue the momentum again further, especially seeing probably this morning's presentation from the researchers from UAUC, what they are actually doing with the other, the medical field and all. I think we have an obligation here to promote this, I think, in terms of how we could implement this further within the fire service training curriculum. I think that's kind of the overall purpose and goal of initiating this project, a couple of years ago. So hopefully, we all continue to chat about this either at the NAFTD conference. I think there is a momentum there as well in terms of us continuing to discuss that. So from the project perspective, I think we really appreciate the feedback that you have provided here. And we'll continue to collaborate and discuss this further.
And the truth is, Sharini's the father of a newborn that is 2 months old.
Yes.
2 months old. So he views these trips as an opportunity to get more than 5 hours of sleep. Which he tells his wife, and when he comes home, he's up straight for 2 days, making up for lost time.
That's the point. We go back and make it up for it.
We gotta train you better.
And Kate, please, could you share some perspectives and thoughts in closing?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I want to say thank you to you all for being here. I think this is a really good discussion. I know that rubric looks like there's not much to it sometimes, but months of work went into that, so I appreciate you being willing to discuss the hard things. I think moving forward, we have to think about the different lenses of stakeholders that are in this room and how we can best serve them all. And so maybe it isn't one rubric, maybe it looks different, maybe we'll be here 5 years from now talking about way cooler things because technology has evolved that way. But I really appreciate your input, I appreciate you being so involved and engaged. That's really critical to this process. And I'm excited to see where this goes. We have to keep the train moving, so
Yeah.
that's what we're gonna do.
Choo-choo.
Yes.
My final thank you. To Kate's point, this was a lot of work to get to this point, and it's like, I guess many other projects, we put something up on the wall, and we're trying to see what sticks, and we're trying to see what resonates with you, the user, and that's the golden nuggets, is what was your insights, your perspectives, and that's going to be taken and reviewed, and we're going to use that as we prepare our final product and go to release this and socialize it. Your voice was part of that, so we want to thank you for that. It could not have happened without your participation. As to where we go next, I mentioned this morning that I have the support of the NAFTD board to begin looking at what's the opportunity to socialize this, to promote this, to get this out there, and to start picking up the mantle and doing some good shit, pardon my language, as opposed to sitting and waiting for somebody else to do it. So that's what our pledge from NAFTD is we're going to see how we can support the effort that you put into this to validate your work and your thoughts, but also to help move the fire service to greater utilization. And Kate, the rubrics are very deep, they're very good. In 5 years, they're going to be talking about how cool they are and who were the visionaries that met in Champaign, Illinois, according to the Book of John, on 5/14, and actually put something like that together. And the inclusion of some of these concepts, the JPRs, along with the 5 things and the conformity assessment, and nobody's done this before. So welcome to the holodeck. We've been where no man has ever dared to go, and we did it successfully. We all survived, and unlike the Da Vinci man, we are maintaining our 2 limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs. We haven't multiplied into 4. The Da Vinci guy had 4 arms, 4 legs. So we've gotten through this without any negative effects. I wish you all safe travels, and thank you. And we are here. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or comments. And again, we can't thank you enough for your participation. And the shuttle is going to the airport at 12:30. Sharini will be emailing information about seeking reimbursement if you need that through the foundation for your travel and overnight lodging. And if there's anything we have forgotten, please step up after we conclude and ask that so we can give you an answer to that and be sure that we take care of your needs and respect your time and investment. So thank you all again.
Thank you so much.